Right, okay, well, so let's start and say welcome to everybody. And firstly, thank you very much for joining today's webinar. And for those of you that haven't joined our webinars before, my name is Sally McDonald, and I'm one of the Client Services Director here at Alterian in our Bristol office. This month, I'm delighted to be able to welcome back Roger Luxton, who's joining today. Roger's one of our senior solutions consultants in EMEA and has worked in a variety of marketing and campaign roles throughout his career, and is a real veteran Alterian marketeer who's been using our technology for over 15 years in various different capacities. And today, Roger's going to be taking us through how anyone using Alterian can turn customer, products, and behavioural data into valuable predictive models. And at the end of this 20-minute presentation, we're going to make sure there's some time for some questions and answers from everybody. So if you have any questions you can think of during the presentation, then if you are logged in via your laptop or desktop, then you'll find the Q&A section at the top of your screen. And if you can't find that, then please do email myself at the email address customersuccess@alterian.com, as I'll also be monitoring this during the presentation. And then lastly, we will be recording the session today for you guys to refer back to. So please don't worry if you haven't made all the notes that you'd like to. We will make sure that the recording is distributed later this week with links to the presentation deck as well via email. So with all of that said, I'm very pleased to hand over to Roger, who will be running us through his presentation and demo today. So over to you, Roger.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Sally, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. So it's my pleasure really to walk you through today's agenda. So I'm going to start off by just going through modelling, how we can build a model, how we can use the results, and then evaluate the performance. And I'll be doing that under the guise of an ROI story. It's the way at Alterian we tend to focus now on the return on investment our products can give people rather than just on the technology itself. I'll then be sharing some practical tips. I've got 6 different tips of to think about when you're building and developing any models before summarising, and then, as Sally says, we've got some questions. But one of the reasons we've got today's session is really because of a sort of similar session we ran at our Elevate CX event in Bristol recently. So at that event, one of the sort of sessions was to talk about some of the technology that we've got at Alterian, which was probably being underutilized amongst our existing customers. And at that session, one of those elements that I took people through was modelling, and it was sort of interesting at the end of the session. The number of people who weren't aware they actually already had modelling as part of their standard implementation of campaign management. So basically, anybody who's got the browser-based version, campaign management, so that sort of versions 4 and pretty much onwards, you've automatically got modelling built in. And this was the feedback from one of the guys afterwards, who was just thinking, "This is great. I've actually got some modelling capability." He didn't think he had that before, and subsequently he's been playing around and building some models off the back of that. And hopefully we'll see after today's session that some people here might also want to do the same. So in terms of our ROI story approach that I mentioned, what we're very, very cognizant at Alterian is that people don't just buy technology for technology's sake. They build it to solve business problems. And what we do is like to frame all our technology in the context of solving those problems for people. And the way we do that is by building out what we call ROI stories. And we've developed over time a number of these. And I'm going to focus on one of these. Ali has so much data. But we've got a whole number of other ways that our technology is also used by people. And it's just to help to put it into context of the business benefits you can get from using our technology to solve those challenges we all face. So without further ado, let's go into Ali has so much data. So to paint a picture of Ali is somebody who works in marketing. They're a person largely responsible for driving out campaigns in their business. They're not somebody by any means that you call a statistician or a data scientist. Yes, they understand things like campaign selections and testing and reports, but they're definitely not a high-end statistician. And the challenge for Ali is that currently it takes her too long to access and understand the customer data and use it for modeling. So what we're going to do first off is just paint a picture of Ali's sort of current marketing experience here. So what happens with Ali? Well, Ali in her business has got loads of data available, covering all manner of things around customers, their behavior, their product purchases. Ali has a requirement sometimes to do some modeling. Now, unfortunately, what she has to do, because she hasn't got tools, technology, or skills herself, she has to go out to other people to actually build those models for her. Now, that could be a combination of internal people, so in IT or a data science team, but more often than not, it's going out to her agencies. So there's external cost involved in building the models. So as a result, although Ali has lots of data, she doesn't tend to use it all for all the model building. Because she doesn't build a model for all of her campaigns, what she tends to do is stick to fairly similar selections each time she drives out her campaigns. And although she's done some modeling in the past, there's obviously that cost element, and she has to be mindful about how often she wants models built, and she tends not to build them as often as she'd like. Now, if we think about what an adaptive marketing experience could look like for Ali, well, with a tool like Alterian, she's got all the data available, all in one place, covering behavior across channels, product purchases, as well as customer information. She's also, as we're going to see, got some marketing-friendly modeling tools, some tools that don't need top-level stats knowledge to be able to build a model. She's got the ability to take the results of those models and drop them into her campaigns, which she's comfortable with, and also to look at them, the results of those models and how they behave, and indeed the results of her campaigns, again, things she's comfortable with. And what that means is that for Ali, she's able to build what she can almost term disposable models. So because she's got access to these tools herself, rather than relying on external third parties, she can build a model to improve every single campaign she runs. So she might still, within the business, she might still go out to people to build strategic models, which require a lot of detailed insight and thought. But for disposable models, to improve her chances of success of getting higher responses for a campaign, for instance, she can use the technology to do that herself. And what we see for the likes of Ali and businesses who've taken on board and start to use the modeling that's built in, then we can see significantly faster model building, over 10 times as fast to build a model. We see through the use of using those models, significant increases in response rates and also click-through rates. And importantly, we see that there's much less impact on internal resources, but also reduced cost for being able to build those models. So it's kind of a win-win. So what I'm now going to do is I'm just going to dip into a little demo here and show you just around the product and what's available in terms of modeling. So I'll just toggle out of the PowerPoint a second. So on your screen now, you'll see I'm in Campaign Manager. So what I've got on the left-hand side, you'll see it's typical view that many of you will have of the technology. If I just click on the Tools button, we've got a number of predictive tools available. So if I just land on the predictive ones, we've actually got 3 predictive tools in here. The one I'm going to focus on is the predict inclusion. This is a way of calculating a regression score. So for any model we want to build, we can generate a score from 0 to 1 just on how likely is somebody to exhibit that behavior. So that could be how likely they are to respond to a campaign, to buy a particular product, to lapse, or to use a particular channel. We've also got 2 additional modules, which I'm not going to focus too much time in today. Those are cycle and predict next transaction date. Those look at things like a transactional level, so something like a product purchase table, and identify the behavioral, the time gaps between purchases to predict when somebody's likely to purchase again. They probably work best if people have got purchase cycles which are quite high. Certainly wouldn't be tools that I recommend for things like cars or holidays, which tend to be more drawn out purchase cycles. So the one we'll focus on is the purchase inclusion. So on the right-hand side of the screen, what I've done is I've opened up an existing segment document where I've created 3 models previously. I've got one which predicts whether somebody's going to be high value or not, somebody whether they're going to buy a particular product type. The database I'm using is a travel database, so it's an experience product. And I've also got one which predicts the likelihood of somebody buying in or booking in July. So I've got three models that I've built. I've also underneath, I've just banded those up as well. So if we dip into one of these models, so what we need to start off with on the model is just our target group. So I've selected people here who've purchased a high value product as their last purchase. That's what I'm using to predict somebody's likelihood of being a high level purchaser. If we want to, we can compare that against a universe, or you can compare it against everybody on the base. And then next, we just throw in fields that we think might be useful to include in our model. So we can include as many or as few fields as we want in there. So once we throw those fields in, at any point, we can press this process button just on the bottom, and that will generate and calculate and create that model. Now, on this database of about 1.8 million records, it takes about 90 seconds to generate the score. Now, I'm by no means a statistician. The thing I like about this is that actually I can just throw those fields in, make my selection, press that go button, and then I can just access this gains chart down here. Now, this gains chart shows me the uplift, that model that's being calculated in 90 seconds or less, the uplift it's giving me against hitting people at random if I was using it to select. So if I just hover over this red button, what this means that if I use this model to predict people who are going to be high value, I can actually reach what the model predicts. It will be nearly 75% of those people by only needing to contact 45% of the base. Now, it might be the first time I run this model, I don't get a great uplift. I might want to take some fields out or change some of my my criteria. But importantly for me as a marketeer, very quickly I can generate a score that I can then go on to use. Once I've generated that score, then just if I toggle back on, I can either use the score, or if I want, I can write that onto the database as a field. So I've, in this case, I've chosen to write this on as a field on the database. And then also, the thing I find quite useful is to then start coding that up into categories. So if I'm making selections or want to do some analysis, what I can do is throw that into people who are highly unlikely through to highly likely according to the model. In this case, I've just used 5 bands, but you could use as many as you want in there. And the result of that model, once we repeat that process, just on our database table, you can see we can generate some fields which you can then use for selection in our campaigns. So it's nice and easy to be able to generate those models. Once we've created those models, then we can use either of the campaign tools. So we could use the tracks campaigns that are available in Silverlight, or we can use the campaign designer campaigns to create and run those campaigns. So for instance, if I open this campaign, very simple campaign, I'm going to choose all the records, and I'm just going to choose people who are highly likely according to my score, my model score, and I'm going to, in this case, generate a file. So this might be a piece of direct mail. It could equally be an email campaign that I'm going to run. It really can be as straightforward as that to generate a score in just a few minutes, and then select the people who are the highest scorers for that model. If I want to maybe build up and do a bit more testing of that model, then also I can do that as part of my process. So in this particular campaign, I'm just going to restrict it to a test audience that I've created of 100,000 records. And I'm just selecting 20,000 people from my highly likely category, 20,000 people from my likely, 20,000 people from my average, and just down to 20,000 from my highly unlikely. I'm then using the campaign variables option to say what segment somebody was in when I executed the campaign, and then I'm going to run that campaign. As soon as I use that campaign variable, that's going to write the segment that somebody was in into the contact and response history tables, so I'm able to see and evaluate the performance of how that campaign performs. So that campaign will give me a way of analysing which of those segments generates the highest response levels. Another way that I can do things is maybe if I've got an existing selection, then I can just take a subset of my modelled selection. So I could maybe take the best 20,000, my best scorers, but then I could run my usual selection that I'm more comfortable with than I traditionally do. So I think this is quite a good way of just building up your confidence of using the model to say, well, we'll take some of the model scores, the best ones, but then we'll use our existing usual selection as well. And again, making sure we set the variable so we can record either somebody's model score at the time we executed or which segment they were in. So when I've run those campaigns or set those campaigns up, then what I can do is I can come back into my reporting module, and I can start looking at how those campaigns performed. So this is a mocked up example of what a response campaign might look like for that test campaign, where I'm testing approximately 20,000 people I'm contacting in each of the model segments, and I can see that actually my best performing group is significantly better responders than the people in my highly unlikely category. In this case, more than sevenfold in terms of response. So that's just a sort of little look through the modeling that's available. Just while I'm in the tool and before I go back to the PowerPoint, it's probably worth just highlighting that if you want to see more information, you can access through that through the product help option. So you can reach the Alterian Academy, and there's some useful information in here about how you can analyze the results, for instance, of your models, as well as a bit of a background on that. So you can get some information on so you can gather a bit more understanding of things like those gains charts and what that little matrix means. So there's some useful information. I'd suggest when you start to build the model, it's worth having a little look at that. So what I'm going to do is just toggle back now to my deck and just remind everybody what we've just seen in that demo. So we've seen there's 3 modeling tools available. Probably the most useful I've found in practice is that predict inclusion model. Can allow you to develop a multitude of models. It's very straightforward to define your target group just by dragging in a selection, and then you can throw any fields that you want into that model. The nice thing for me as a non-statistician is you can clearly see how good the model is and how effective it is, which should give you confidence to see if it's something that you could use for campaign selection, for instance. And then it's again straightforward to categorize that model into different groups, in this case 5 different categories. Once we've run that, set up that model, you can use it straight away in campaigns. I've happened to have visuals of Campaign Designer, but you can use it in the Silverlight interface as well. And we can also view the results of how that campaign performs by using the contact and response history tables. So that's a little overview of the model. Very straightforward for the likes of Ali to be able to generate their own models, even if they're not a statistician, and then use and test them. So what I'm now going to do is I'm just going to cover off a few practical tips for to think about if you're building models, and it's things that we've sort of learned from really from best practice from our clients and our partners and ourselves building models. So firstly, one of the beauties of Alterian is the ability to use engineering to create all those extra variables. So just in the front end, you've got a whole stack of engineering tools which you can use to create extra fields which you might want to include in a model. And one of the things you can do is you can store those within a segment document, so you can just generate those fields as and when you require them, and then simply drag and drop them into your model. That can be really useful if you're building sort of models where you might want to generate some new fields for a particular product or a particular product type, where you can almost have that segment document set up with a number of fields saved, and maybe you can make slight tweaks to those fields that you want to create, to focus it so they're relevant for the particular target area. Also, obviously that engineering can be equally useful for people who have modeling experts, and you just want to generate and create extra fields for potentially modeling, where rather than using our modeling tool, you can also pass that off to internal experts straight out of Alterian as well. One of the other things that that some of our clients like to do is to use the profiling. So profiling is one of the reporting tools that's available in the product, and sometimes it can be quite a good way of sort of doing almost a pre-test before you build a model. So by using the profiling tool, you can throw some fields in there, effectively test the same thing you might want to create in a model. So for instance, whether somebody's likely to book in July, or whether somebody's likely to respond to a particular campaign, and you get some visual representation of the results. So you get things like Z-scores and strengths and indexes. So particularly if you're comfortable with profiling and just want to build up your confidence before you're starting to use the modeling, then I think a good way to, good thing to do is to use that profiling report to think about what fields you might want to include in a model before you actually go on to build the model. The next sort of practical tip is really just to think about your input variables. This is, I think, the potential sort of risk area for developing models, and the reason maybe why people aren't always as confident about building their own models. So, we've got 3 don'ts listed here. I think as a general rule, don't try and overfit. Don't have too many variables. There's no point having sort of 50, 100 fields in your model. Generally, what you find is most of the successful models we see clients build have somewhere between, sort of 5, 6, 7, and maybe 20 variables included. And you can run them a number of times and just see the impact of taking some of those variables in and out of the model. The other thing is, just be aware of using variables that are actually a proxy for the target. So if you're trying to predict somebody's value, for instance, if you included in your model a field such as value banded, effectively they're counting the same thing, and you'll get a very sort of a model which looks on paper very, very effective, but actually that's because the two, the variable and the target are interlinked. So it's just something to be aware of. Just think, actually, I don't want to use that field. If I'm trying to predict that, I don't want to use other fields which actually represent that already. And the third thing is just to think about potentially variables that you might only know after an event. So for instance, if you're trying to create a model of your prospects and identifying which of them are most likely to sign up, and you only capture a field such as date of birth when somebody becomes a customer and signs up with you, then you wouldn't want to include that date of birth field in your model, or the age that might be generated from that date of birth, because actually you only know that information at the point that somebody signed up. So just something to be aware of, just with a little bit of sort of forethought on generating your models. The next one, again, just trying to build confidence in your model, is I always like when I've created a model that I'm sort of reasonably comfortable with, particularly if it's a model where I'm running, I'm doing, it's quite an important model because I want to use it for quite a significant selection, or maybe I'm using some more expensive channels like direct mail. I want to make sure that model's right and producing good results. So one of the things I like to do is to visualize using the tools such as charts and Venns and reports that are available already in Alterian, just as a useful sense check. So in this one, this is just looking at the 5 bands from highly unlikely to highly likely, and you can just play around with seeing how those look against various fields on your database, just to give you a sort of visual check if the model seems to be selecting the right groups of people. Just does wonders for your confidence, really. And then another point is, don't think you have to sort of generate a model and go hell for leather and just use your model selection. Often what we see is that people will already have their sort of standard selections that they might want to use for campaigns, their standard audiences. So one of the things you can do is just include those best scorers as produced by those models, just as a test against your usual selection. And that's quite a neat way of just proving the value of the model and whether you can get an uplift before maybe you start to have confidence and use modeling more. It's a good way of proving that value. And then finally, in terms of practical tips, make sure you use campaign variables. So in the campaigns I showed you earlier, I showed I was recording somebody's segment that they were in at the time of campaign execution. Probably even better, you can actually record somebody's model score at the time the campaign was executed. So that gives you maximum information, because that will be stored in the contact table, that model score. So when you come to report on people's performance by their model score, you've got that information available. So you can really use that to understand the uplift or not that the model was giving you. So definitely make use of those campaign variables. So we've covered a lot of ground there. So giving you a sort of an overview of the product. So just to summarize, really. Firstly, modeling is available. So anybody who's got a browser-based version of Alterian Campaign Manager, they've got modeling available. It's very fast to create a model, so only takes a few minutes to generate and create a model. The nice thing I like is that non-stato is it's easy to see if it's any good, and finally, it's easy to use it in a campaign, whichever of the campaign selection tools you do. So, what I'd encourage people is go and give it a go. Try and use the model, see if it works for your selections. So that concludes my part of the session. Just wonder if there's any questions.
Great, thanks for that, Roger. A lot of content you had to go through there, so fantastic, and well done for fitting it all within the time scale. So great, thanks for that. Yes, we have had a question come through, and the question is, how does Alterian compare with using such tools as Spss Sas Etc Kxcn?
Okay. Yep. So obviously there's other modelling tools on the market. They all calculate things slightly differently. But when we've done testing of our model versus those other models, what we see is we identify very similar groups of people as top scorers to those other modelling tools would be. Probably our main difference, we don't claim to be a full-blown modelling package. Some of those other tools will have more bells and whistles and options which a statistician can play around with. So ours will produce similar results, but just do it in, I guess, a more easier user-friendly way.
Yeah, makes sense, Roger. Makes absolute sense. I'm just going to quickly look to see if there's any more questions that have come through, and it looks like there haven't been. So as a wrap up, just like to say thank you very much to everyone who's joined the webinar today, and we hope you found it informative and worthwhile. As Roger showed you guys today, there are a couple of links to some great articles in the product help file, so we'll make sure that we reference those in our follow-up email. And if you do have any other further questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or your usual customer and partner services contact, or any other contacts that you have within Alterian. So lastly, just thanks again for joining us today, and hope to see you guys next time. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.